Welcome to my latest video series on leading in uncertainty. It's a sort of FAQ where I try to answer typical questions being asked of me at the moment. This fourth episode looks at the concept of flexibility and how you might embed it beyond the current situation. So of course, remote working and working from home has really put a spotlight on what's happening in people's home life. So whether it's children or pets or other relatives or not actually having a quiet space to work, we're actually being zoomed into people's homes, and it's really, really hard now to actually separate what's going on at home from what happens at work. And so flexibility in how people do their work has become a real issue for leaders. And at the core level, I guess, we talked in episode 1 around the importance of showing the values of care and compassion. And one way in which actually demonstrating care at the moment is, of course, by empathizing about people's home situations and having some flexibility around how work is done. But more importantly, by doing this, by caring about people and being willing to accommodate their home life, what you're actually doing is you're also building a degree of trust and also some goodwill and possibly loyalty for the future. Many people are considering where they want to be in their lives. An event like this often gets people to reflect on what's important. And of course, if you have really good staff, you're going to want them to be with you for the journey beyond. And so the more you actually accommodate them, the more likely they'll have some goodwill and loyalty in terms of staying with you and the organisation. So flexibility is really important for the staff members themselves, but it also has a lot of value for the organisation more broadly. And in fact, not showing this at the moment will probably actually create quite a degree of not just concern, but maybe even resentment towards you as a leader. So it's a really important aspect to be considering, I think. So what are the enablers? Well, I guess that if you are offering flexibility, what you're really offering to do is to judge people on the outcome, not the process. So I've had lots of examples where people, despite having a fairly chaotic home life with homeschooling children or having young children at home, they're still actually expected to have the same schedule that they normally would have in terms of calling in on meetings and phone calls, etc. And as many say, well, look, I can do my job, but just not in the way you're expecting me to do it at the moment. So it's about being clear on the outcome and not being too concerned about how that's actually delivered. So it's really the opposite, I guess, of micromanaging, which seems to be, again, an all too common theme around people complaining that their leaders are not trusting them and are doing a lot more checking in and being a lot more directive around what they expect. So of course, to create trust, you're really empowering people. And we are seeing a lot of people just fly in terms of working from home, having an extra bit of responsibility, a lot more self-direction. And of course, this is where we really want people to go. We want people to be self-directed. We want people to feel that they're growing and flying. And so that's really, really important to make sure that you're not actually over-managing people and stemming that to any great extent. The other enabler, of course, is to recognise that flexibility is very individualised. So what one person might want is quite different from another person. So it's a bit of a silly thing to say, but being flexible in your flexibility is important as well. And of course, that will possibly involve some discussion with the broader team. For example, if meetings have to be at a particular time, how do you work that so it's actually going to be flexible enough for everyone's particular situations? Flexibility is also a two-way street, and another theme I'm getting at the moment is people who are worried about underperformance. So I think because there's been a degree of anxiety and people have been less visible, then there's no doubt that you get a small percentage of the population who actually exploit this and make excuses for not doing what they need to do. But at the end of the day, this is a job, and the organization will only stay relevant if the people who are part of it are unable to input into that. So I guess the strategies here, they're saying that they've always been in terms of performance. It's being really clear on what the expectations and deliverables are and holding people to those, and any adjustments that have been made in terms of work that doesn't need to be done or priorities that have been sort of given more time for, then making sure there's a timeline on these adjustments. So there's some sort of review is obviously something that needs to be thought about. And of course, there's always the peer pressure as well. So the more you build in interdependent goals so that people are accountable to their peers and not just you as the leader, the better that works for you. But these issues are the same as they've always been. We're always going to get some people who don't necessarily perform and, are quite willing to come up with reasons why they can't. So it's definitely a two-way street. But what you shouldn't be doing is, because a couple of people are exploiting it, making the conditions the same for everyone. Because as I've just mentioned, lots of people are thriving and flying in these new situations. And so we don't actually want to pull them back just because some people are actually not doing the right thing. The broader issue around flexibility, though, is really interesting because it's actually around the flexible mindsets we're actually going to need in terms of going forward into the future. And innovation and adaptability, of course, are going to be critical for business survival and actually for career relevance as well, because if you're not willing to be adaptable, then there's not going to be many places that you can actually work. And innovation, particularly during disruption, again, is going to be what's going to actually get you through as a team and as an organization. So the flexibility in work practices is one thing, but I think the broader challenge, which needs a lot more consideration and can really only be developed over time, is how do you as a leader create that culture where people are really able to say what they say and be really open without being judged. How do you build in reflection? So I think one of the things that's happened during COVID is that people have slowed down and have been a little bit more considered and have had a lot more time to think. So how do we integrate that into the way in which we work as teams? So we are reflecting on progress, reflecting on our processes and what went well and what didn't. So it becomes an expectation that in this team, what we do is we do consider how we're going and we do have those conversations and we do see that as important and we do build that into our day. We also, if we want to innovate, we need to be willing to take risks. So how do we create a culture within our team where people can make mistakes and that not be such a bad thing? That stuff we talk about celebrating success, mistakes rather than sort of judging people for them. And of course, this involves collaboration, experimenting, and really importantly, being open to feedback, not only from our colleagues and our leadership, but also from our stakeholders. What are people saying about us that we need to be open to so that we can actually adapt and reinvent? And quite often this is called psychological safety. So as a leader, what are you doing to make sure that people can take a risk, they can be open, there is that environment where people feel that there is a degree of psychological safety in being able to tell the truth and try new things out. So let's have a check-in on how you're going. So at the moment, how well are you demonstrating flexibility? And are you, particularly for someone who likes to be quite directive and likes to have some degree of control, how are you going in backing off from that and actually judging people on the outcome rather than the process? And how well are you managing individualized requests for flexibility whilst also managing what the team needs overall, because there's always that tension between accommodating individuals and making sure that it actually still works for the greater good, if you like. And then, of course, are people misusing flexibility? How are you managing that? And really importantly, what's the sort of culture that you're actually setting up at the moment that is enabling adaptability through this flexibility of mindsets as opposed to flexibility in work practices? So give yourself a little bit of a check-in on how you're going with those elements around embedding flexibility in your team. And in the next episode, what I'm going to be talking about is how do we help teams stay motivated when the goals keep shifting? Because after all, we talk a lot about goals being really integral to motivation. But if they change day by day, or maybe even hour by hour, what does that actually mean for how we keep people encouraged and motivated and on track? And until then, go well and stay resilient.